So this is just a little bit of information about global responsibility, the host of tonight's webinar. So we, just to explain who we are, if you're not familiar, we are an international organization founded just over a decade ago. And we're centered around the cause of human dignity, common good, and really working to promote those principles in the civic political realm. So we do this through formation and action. So first, to really truly understand what upholds human dignity, and I think there may be some confusion out there as to what is truly good for the human person, and what really is the common good. So we seek to form ourselves and then to take action to pursue these ideals. And then the next slide. So one of our initiatives is this webinar series, and we're calling it The Common Good in the Public Square. And tonight is the first one, so we're excited that you all have joined. So the idea, as I said, is to start with formation. So we're going to learn about a topic. And then we want to take what we've learned, mull it over, discuss it among our networks, our friends group, our family, etc. And we have a blog, we have other resources on our website, ways to get us thinking more about a topic. And then hopefully it inspires action. So that action piece is optional, but definitely encouraged, because it's sort of the extension of what we've learned and being inspired to actually work to achieve these ideals in our own environments. So we'll talk a bit more about that action piece later tonight. But the Global Responsibility staff has organized tonight's presentation, and the rest of this Common Good in the Public Square webinar series that follows this model of formation, dissemination, and action. And then you can find more on our website about some of the other projects that we do. This is just one of many initiatives that we're involved with and organizations that we support. So over here on our next slide, I'm excited to introduce our speaker tonight. Dr. Jenny Driver, who will be giving us this presentation on transhumanism, aging, and end of life. So I have a little bio I'm going to read about Dr. Driver. Jenny Driver, MD, MPH, is an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. She's a member of the Division of Aging at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. Dr. Driver is trained as both a geriatrician and oncologist, and her career focuses on improving care for vulnerable older adults, particularly those with cancer. Her work has made a national and international impact. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you now.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Tanya, for that kind introduction, and I'm really honored to be the inaugural speaker of your series, which is so important. You know, getting people to think about the deep issues of our day and to get involved in making a difference. So I have a feeling that this is a topic that not too many people have spent a lot of time hearing about or thinking about. I know I certainly didn't when I was asked to give a talk in Spain at an international conference on transhumanism. The only question I wanted to ask is, if you could raise your hand, I can't see you, but Tanya can count, how many people had ever heard of transhumanism before this talk was advertised?
I'm seeing a couple hands.
Couple hands, okay.
Yeah,
so just a few.
good number.
A good number. Yeah.
By no means the majority of our attendees, though.
Okay.
I'm not sure I would raise my hand for that either.
Okay, great. So that's not surprising. It's not exactly a topic that's plastered all over the newspapers, especially these days, but it's actually everywhere around us, in the movies we watch, in the popular science fiction, novels that we might read, and even in very high echelons of political life, the World Health Organization. I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which the thinking behind the movement of transhumanism is affecting the world for good and for not so good. Of course, you'll be the judge of that. My job is not to be preaching against something, but just to help you understand and learn about it the way that I had to do in order to give a talk at an international conference. And my task was to talk about it as a geriatrician. And why would they ask a geriatrician to fly all the way to Spain to talk about transhumanism? Well, that's because one of the major tenets of transhumanism is that we have to overcome the limitations on the human race, and the most important being aging and death. So of course, geriatricians are experts in aging, and I think that's why they asked me to come and give my reflections on it, a topic that I had really not thought much about. You know, when I was first invited, I was going to say no. I said, you know, I really don't know anything about this. But, you know, then I went onto the website of the transhumanist website. It's called Humanity Plus. Very interesting to check that out and see the tenets of the organization. And I discovered there that I had been intimately acquainted with transhumans since childhood. Enhanced human beings, otherwise known as superheroes, starred in my favorite television shows, or the heroes of my favorite comic books. And maybe you can advance the slide if you don't mind. Maybe Captain America is best fits the transhumanist ideal, an ordinary person transformed by biotechnology into a perpetually healthy super soldier. So then I got interested. I said, hey, I know these people. I look up to these transhumans, and I do want to give a talk on this. So I did a little research about the origins of the movement. It's very interesting. It's a very recent movement. It's all tied up with modernism, well, first the Enlightenment and then modernism. And the founder is Nikolai Fyodorov, who lived between 1929 and 1903. And he was a Russian Orthodox, a faithful Russian Orthodox, a philosopher who really thought outside the box. But he was a man of faith, and he's what we would call today a futurist. And his understanding was that the mind, the human mind, and probably the soul would have been tied up with that for him, is supreme and has to be able to outlive the body, right? That the body kind of fails the soul and the mind when it gives out. And so society will eventually have to overcome this limitation of our bodies giving out. And we really have a moral obligation to pursue what these days people call human enhancement. Could be genetic enhancement, could be all kinds of medical, treatments, technological, whatever they might be. And that ultimately we want to achieve immortality and even the resurrection of the dead. So which sounds like a very common Judeo-Christian belief, but in this case, it's actually bringing back your own body, not a glorified body, as let's say when an Orthodox Christian believes that someday their soul will be reunited to their body, but it would be a very different kind of body that would be more fitted to everlasting life, right? In this case, the resurrection of the dead is actually bringing your own body or some other body, even uploading yourself into a computer so that your mind can keep living. And what's so interesting here is that his thinking was really the beginning of the Soviet space program. And there was a whole bunch of followers of his who had this dream of that technology would allow us to overcome these basic limitations. It took people very far. Obviously, the Soviets got to the moon eventually, and were really the first in space, if I'm remembering it correctly. And this continues on today. There are a number of very prominent people of Russian ethnicity, namely Elon Musk, who's creating kind of a commercial spaceship, and a number of others. The co-founder of Google. There's a bunch of very prominent Russian billionaires and philanthropists who are still working on on these things, not just going to space, but work that essentially will help us to overcome what they perceive as the defects of aging and death. Next slide. So I just wanted to begin, so we have a little framework with some of the philosophical background of the transhumanist movement. And again, this is huge generalizations. There's a lot to the movement. There are different strains of it. There's a feminist strain that we're not really going to talk about. And this is more of the technological strain. And one of the basic bedrock ideas is it's okay to modify human nature through technology. It's okay. There's no problem with it. We have a moral imperative, actually, to enhance ourselves. So if there's something we can take, a drug we can take to make us faster, smarter, live longer, we are morally obliged to do that. Don't worry about it. There's no concern. The concern would be if you didn't do it. And in the mind of the transhumanist thinkers, there's really no difference between medical therapy and human enhancement. So just to give you some examples of medical therapy would be, I give you insulin because you don't have insulin, so you can, I'm replacing something that's missing, so you can be healthy as possible. And enhancement would be, I'm a biker, and I pull over on the Tour de France to give myself some kind of drug or infuse red blood cells so that I can be even better at my biking, even faster, and hopefully win. So one of the most striking tenets is this idea that the end will justify the means. Whatever you have to do in order to get to the good, to the goal, is okay. And there might be some collateral damage, but that's okay. It's justified by the good that you're trying to achieve. And that would include eugenics, using genetic manipulation in order to enhance the species, as transhumanists consider enhancement. So on the other end are people who are very skeptical of this and nervous when they hear about this, sometimes because it means kind of messing with Mother Nature, right? That there's an integrity to human nature. It's not a defect to the fact that we live so long and then we die. It's natural. This idea of what is natural shouldn't be rejected. More insidious, people who are concerned about transhumanism are concerned about this idea of manipulating others. As parents can choose the genes that their children have, the children are no longer really a surprise or independent or a mystery. And some ethicists have real concerns about that. Also, of course, elitism. Who is it that's going to be able to afford all of these fancy drugs and techniques that are going to keep people living for a long time? Usually rich, powerful people. Who are those rich, powerful people? And should they be deciding what the future of the human race is going to be? Then this concept of enhancement doesn't mean, what does it mean? So people, and we'll talk about this, people who are against the transhumanist movement just disagree fundamentally on what human enhancement is. And then, of course, the slippery slope argument, if you start tinkering with the basics of human DNA or some other part of our identity, it becomes very hard to control that over time. And so some people have good intentions, some people won't. And it seems inevitable to people who are concerned about some of the ideas of the transhumanists that it would kind of get out of control. And then what would happen? So the concerns about that. Okay. All right, that's about as much of the philosophical background as I can give you. Next slide, please. So let's go back to my favorite, well, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, my second favorite transhuman, Captain America. But my favorite, next slide, was Wonder Woman. Of course, she didn't look like this when I was a kid. She's had a major upgrade, I think. But, she, in addition to her superior strength, intellect, and of course, good looks, ages so slowly that she seems immortal to us, to mere humans like us. In transhumanist terms, she would be considered post-mortal, having overcome the fundamental human limitations of aging and death. Okay, so there's a very interesting book called The Postmortals, the idea of postmortals. What would the human race be like if there were no death? It's very interesting. Of course, people have been thinking about that since before, like the ancient Greeks and even before. It's a fascinating idea. Would we be happy if we were post-mortal? There's really nothing more characteristic of our race than a longing to transcend our limitations. You can go to the next slide. But we just really disagree on what that transcendence means. What is it? What are we transcending and how? Okay. Over the past 20 years, my field of gerontology, aging research, has been involved in a great debate. Is aging a problem to be solved, or is it a natural human reality that we can tame, but also embrace? And that's one of the fundamental questions we're asking tonight. Is the human lifespan fixed, or can it be significantly lengthened? In this talk, I'd like to briefly review the demographics and genetics of longevity, examine claims about the possibility of radical life extension, and introduce the complex ethical, moral, and social issues raised by manipulation of the human lifespan. As a geriatrician who also practices palliative care, my life has been dedicated to helping people to age well and to live well until they die, not only physically, but psychologically and spiritually. This slide, next one, reminds us of Erik Erikson's stages of psychological development. Hopefully most people watching tonight have seen this before, something we might have learned in Psychology 101 in college or read about in different ways. And it's very powerful, simple schema for understanding the journey that the human person takes psychologically throughout their life. And the final phase of life is where the greatest human achievements can be accomplished. That of finding meaning, wisdom, and maintaining dignity and integrity in the face of aging and death. Although we try our best to ameliorate them, the inevitable difficulties that accompany aging serve to hone us and refine us, helping us to come to terms with our own mortality and hopefully to make peace with it. And in traditional societies, this is always how it's been understood. And I spent a lot of time in India in my own life, and it's very impressive to see the respect that is given to people in this last stage of life. Respect for their wisdom, for the fact that they've survived successfully, that they have a lot to pass on, and a lot of patience with the limitations that come with age. Well, when my career was beginning in the 1990s, my colleague at Harvard, Dr. David Sinclair, addressed our geriatrics faculty. So this was, we call it grand rounds. You invite somebody in to speak to you so you can learn something new. And he began his lecture by stating, the goal of my career is to double the human lifespan. And I don't think he was ready for the response that he got from this audience. He thought we would be all excited about it. How cool, isn't that awesome? And we were all horrified. You know, why would you want to do that? And he was really mystified. I think he wasn't expecting that response. At that time, he was probably in his 40s. And he and others had recently discovered the genetic pathways that control lifespan and had engineered yeast and mice that could live twice as long as expected. And he'd also shown that this natural substance that's in red wine, everyone's heard about that, called resveratrol, could activate these pathways, bringing about the same effect as something called caloric restriction, which everybody's trying to do all the time. We would call that a diet, right? Well, caloric restriction is a pretty intense diet. And in this case, the drug was working in the same way that essentially starving works. It tricks the body into thinking it's starving, and in response, the body dials up all of its survival mechanisms, countering the effects of whatever's threatening it, but also countering aging. So it's a very interesting discovery. Next slide. So soon after, I went to a conference and I saw a slide like this, illustrating the impact that such an intervention might have. Okay, so if you could do in a mouse what you can do in a human, what you could do in a yeast or a mouse. So that was back in 1990. So at that time, a 50-year-old woman in the United States could expect to live another 31 years, so to the age of 81. Now it's 82. Her life expectancy would increase by 2 years if we could just cure all cancer. We just took cancer out of the realm of possibility for her. Her life expectancy would increase by 2 years. If we cured heart disease, it would increase by 3 years, by 3 years. And if we cured all heart disease, cancer, stroke, and diabetes, it would increase her life expectancy by 15 years, bringing her life expectancy to 96. Okay, so I don't know if it's possible for us to cure all those things. It may be, but if we did, that's the kind of impact it would have on lengthening life. So she would be approaching what we consider to be kind of the maximal life expectancy of a human being, around 100. But if we could do in a human what we could do in a mouse with this type of technology, her remaining life expectancy might be doubled, helping her to reach an age of 120 or more and in good health for most of that time. So you'd essentially be delaying the emergence of all age-related diseases at once, essentially by ramping up these survival pathways. And for those who are already suffering from a disease, you would not only treat that disease, let's say cancer or heart disease, you'd be treating all the others or preventing all the others as well. So I remember being both fascinated and disturbed by the power of this technology. If the human lifespan was not fixed, Dr. Sinclair's career goal seemed possible. Now, this line of research over the past 2 decades has really transformed how we think about aging and how we should approach diseases of aging. It's also captured the imagination of a cohort of billionaires who, if not officially transhumanists, seem to espouse the goals of human enhancement and radical life extension. Companies offering different methods of life extension are proliferating. You can go to the next slide. I saw this one. I was in New York City walking around, and I took that out. Sorry, it might be coming up, but it was an advertisement for, there you go, Save Your Youth. So it's adult stem cell banking. Okay, nobody has any idea if this is ever going to be helpful to you, but you can pay a lot of money to get your stem cells banked because you have hope that in the future it will save you or it will help you, which could be true, but not a lot of data to suggest that we should all be doing this. And you can go back another slide. This is an organization called Calico. It's one of the spin-off companies of Google, I believe. And actually, a Calico researcher reached out to me at one point about my research. So that was interesting, talking with someone from a company like this. And the goal of this company is to cure aging. Because if we can reverse engineer things as computer engineers, then we should be able to reverse engineer human beings, because the human being is essentially a machine, and we should be able to figure out how to control our own lifespan. So there are many, many companies like this out there right now. So before we explore some of these claims of radical life extension, some of them are crazy, like, 1,000 years, no problem, right? We'll extend your life by 500 years without any trouble. So before we explore this, we should really define a few terms. We can define biological aging as a natural process of gradual bodily decline that accompanies the passage of time, making young people old. Very simple. Here you see, this is what's used in Hollywood when they want to age actors and do their makeup, the computer-generated aging simulation. Lifespan, you can go to the next slide, refers to the chronological duration of the life of an individual, or on average for a species, and its limit we call the maximal lifespan. Okay. So here you can see the longest living primate holding the shortest living primate, the human holding the dwarf lemur. and with their maximal lifespans. And then the African elephant, which lives 70 or 80 years, and the mouse, which lives around 2 years. Lifespans above 115 are extremely rare. And you may know the oldest recorded human being died in France, I think in the 1990s, at the age of 122. So life expectancy refers to the number of remaining years that a person is expected to have at a given age. The dramatic increase in life expectancy over the past 120 years has been a marvelous human achievement. Go to the next slide. For most of human history, the majority of people didn't survive beyond their 30s. The average life expectancy at birth rose from 50 years in 1900 to around 80 years in developed nations today. I think you can go to the next slide to see the difference. So if humanity has been able to improve its life expectancy this radically with very crude advances, transhumanists reason that superior technology can offer continued improvements not only in life expectancy, but in lifespan. So currently, life expectancy at birth is about 83 in Spain, 79 in the United States, and 53 in the Central African Republic. So these statistics illustrate the continuing disparity in life expectancy across nations. Next slide. The life cycle refers to the natural progression of life stages over time. For example, the transition from child to adult to parent to grandparent. So medicine strives to decrease the gap between the life expectancy and lifespan by promoting health. Unfortunately, this doesn't always result in a desired outcome. Medical technology can save life, but it may also decrease the number of years lived with disability. For example, you can go to the next slide. Decreases in health from cardiovascular disease, cancer, and other chronic diseases have allowed people to survive to ages where they develop dementia, a devastating condition for which there's really no effective treatment. This has led the field to focus its primary goal on the extension of health rather than life. So the recently coined term Healthspan refers to the number of years an individual is free of serious disease. One measure of Healthspan is the World Health Organization's Healthy Life Expectancy Index, the average age that the first serious disease is diagnosed in a population. So in 2016, that age was 68.5 in the United States. So if we think that life expectancy is over 80, that means that US citizens generally spend 20% of their life in poor health. And so with all of our medical technology, our current approach to treating disease, health span has decreased, not increased. You can go to the next slide. So here you can see normal aging today. You're spending 20% of your life with lots of age-related diseases, and the goal of the field of geroscience, which is how the aging research community is marketing itself right now, is to promote research that increases health span, resulting in what they call a compression of morbidity, like basically crowding all of your badness into the very end, and then you die, but you don't radically extend your lifespan. All right, so now I'm going to introduce you to some of the scientific discoveries that are poised to transform the way we age in a bit more depth. While everyone ages, we don't age at the same rate. One 75-year-old works full-time and plays tennis all the time, while another is bedbound, suffering from 6 chronic diseases. And we describe the first person as robust or fit, and the second person is frail. Frailty is a concept used to describe people with significant vulnerability to disease, disability, and death due to the effects of aging. So in an older population, measures of frailty are more valuable than age as predictors of remaining life expectancy. So this is just showing you survival curves for people who are fit versus severely frail. The more the curve falls, the more people are dying. So you can predict someone's life expectancy, remaining life expectancy, by how fit or frail they are right now. So clearly aging is not just about the passage of chronological time, it's really about biological time. And that clock ticks very differently for different people. You can go to the next slide. there are 9 processes that we call the hallmarks of aging. I won't go through all of them, but they're there for your reference. And these include damage to DNA, damage to the proteins around the DNA, damage to the metabolism, energy production, etc. So sorry, I got a little lost here. All right. So all of these processes now can be targeted with lifestyle interventions and drugs. So we've known since the 1920s that simply decreasing the caloric intake of a mouse by 40% can slow nearly all the effects of aging, leading to a 40% increase in its lifespan. More recent work has discovered that mutating or overexpressing single genes in mice can result in the same effect. You can go to the next slide. This slide is showing the functions of one gene called SIRT1, which essentially is like a switch to turn on all the body's repair mechanisms. If you had this in a pill, you literally would age very slowly. And so huge money has been spent trying to create a pill that would activate SIRT1 with the hope that it would just be an easy way to keep humans healthy and living longer. SIRT1s are just one of many pathways that are strongly associated with lifespan. Ironically, while drug companies and venture capitalists have been busy pouring money into some of these companies, inexpensive medications that effectively target these pathways are already approved and in use. Next slide. Okay. Metformin, probably some of you have heard of this. It's the most common medication we use to treat diabetes. It comes from a lilac plant. It turns out that metformin is also active in many of these pathways and can help to likely prevent and treat all of the diseases that you see here all at the same time. Next slide. So these are just all the pathways of the hallmarks of aging that metformin seems to be related. Next. The other interesting thing is that despite all the money being spent on this huge industry of helping us live longer, there's another thing that's completely free. You don't even have to spend the 5 cents per pill to take metformin. You can just exercise. So this is a famous study called the FINGER study. It was Finnish geriatric intervention study to prevent cognitive impairment. And you can see here that with exercise, one group did exercise and also some other lifestyle changes. And this is just showing their performance on a cognitive test. So, looking at their cognitive function and how the group that got the intervention had higher performance on this test. They all started out having normal cognitive function. Over time, there was no decline in the group that was doing the exercise compared to the group that wasn't. So, I mean, it's hard to know if it was a lack of decline or if it was better. You can't really tell in a study like this. The bottom line is there was a very significant difference. If you could have a pill that did this, it would be the biggest moneymaker in the history of humanity, right? But since it's not a pill and it's something you have to do through behavior, nobody cares about it. Next. I shouldn't say nobody cares, it's just hard to get people to care. All right, so this is just a slide showing some of my own work. I'm showing you the geographic distribution of frailty. Red is bad. That's where the most frail people live. This is a combination of many things, including poverty. Great. Next. Okay. Now here, I'm getting into something that hopefully can help us really put this idea of radical life extension to rest. And it has to do with running up against fixed limits. So this is marathon times. You have men on the bottom over many years, and then women who got in the game a bit later. And you can see that in both cases, in the recent past, there's been very little budging on the improvement in marathon times. And that's true of any sport. And that's why people start resorting to different types of enhancement to try to get better than someone who is kind of born to be superior in these areas, someone like Michael Phelps or Usain Bolt, right? These people who just were born with this incredible advantage. So this idea of the fixed limit is, it holds true for aging as well. Next. There has been, now it's pretty clear demographically, it wasn't in the 1990s, now it's pretty clear that there really is a fixed limit for the human body. And only so many things can go wrong before it gives up the ghost. It's not likely that that's going to change. I just wanted to switch now to more of the ethical concerns about this whole movement to try to expand life expectancy. And one of them is very popular today, which is the environment, the effect of human beings on the environment. So already in this country, the estimated carbon footprint of an average U.S. citizen is 20 metric tons. You can compare that to the rest of the world in green. And then even a homeless person in the United States, has an incredibly large carbon footprint compared to people in the rest of the world. So what does it mean when people who live in the wealthiest country that uses most resources get to live twice as long as people who live in a country where they're where on average they live to the age of 50. Next. Great. And then the other problem is what happens when there aren't a lot of people being born and everyone just lives a long time. And that's a whole nother interesting demographic conversation. But you can see here that the age pyramid in Japan is completely reversed. It's not a sustainable shape for a society. And so if it's already a problem that the older people are not giving up their jobs so that the younger people can have a job. So what happens when the older people get even older? It doesn't seem like a sustainable thing. Next. And for me, this is one of the most chilling considerations. We are in the midst of an epidemic, as you know, of opioid abuse, of suicide that has never been seen before, and at least in recent history. This is the states in blue, the dark blue, are called the suicide belt. This is where suicides are, rates are going up very dramatically, to the point that they're actually decreasing the average life expectancy of US citizens. So for the first time in the past 2 years, in the US, life expectancy declined rather than increasing. And this is probably why. So if people can't find reasons to live, and they're young, these are mostly young people, sometimes older people too, but then why would you think that extending their lives even more would be something that's desirable, right? It isn't the problem that we want people to live out the life expectancy that they have before we start trying to expand on it. Next. And this is something I encounter on my way to work. It's all over the neighborhood, in between the two hospitals that I work at. And wants everyone to carry naloxone because it's so common now to find people lying in the street with an overdose or about to die. Next. So what are we going to do with all this extra time? We already have the problem of super prolonged adolescence. There's books written about it, how we're not growing up in this country. We don't want to grow up. It's like the Peter Pan syndrome. It's a problem, right? It's a problem when we have extra time. We think we have all the time in the world to meet the right person, to settle down. And actually, we don't. There's in some ways you can miss the boat. We're learning about that. So what are we going to do with all that extra time? Next. So I think we want to recognize the poverty of a culture that doesn't value older age and rediscover the human capital of older people. That is a sustainable project. We want to create meaningful roles for older adults after retirement. It's a huge problem right now. What are they all going to do? If there's nothing to do, why stick around? And we're seeing that. I mean, I've had a huge increase in requests for assisted suicide from older people, especially men, who feel there's no point to them living anymore. A very practical thing is to increase intergenerational interaction, engage the young in caring for the old, and maybe the 40-somethings who are really rich billionaires would think differently about aging if they actually had something to do with people who were in their 80s. And then, of course, providing the support that's needed to care for people at older ages. Okay, next slide. Great. Linda Fried is a renowned geriatrician, and we all look up to her in my field. And she, I encountered this article recently, and I thought this quote was fantastic. And of course, I can't see it because of my Zoom box, so I have to figure out how to minimize you. Hang on one second. There we go. The keystone for successful aging is our ability to enjoy good health and function. Having created a new stage of life, the next step is to make it meaningful. So I think this kind of says it all. Like, before we go whole hog into extending human lifespan, we have to make sure that if people's lifespan is extended, that would be a good outcome for them. And it's interesting, if you look at the people who are pushing for this, who are they? They are predominantly men, they're predominantly white, they're almost all very wealthy. And I'm not saying anything about men or white men, it's just that they happen to be these particular individuals happen to be very powerful, and they happen to want to be able to continue living for as long as possible because their life is so good, you know? Also because they're so excited in many cases about what they've been able to do in their lives, starting a company like Amazon, you know, Facebook, Elon Musk with his cool Tesla cars. I mean, who wouldn't want to keep living, you know, if you have a life like that? But not everyone finds reward in those things. And in fact, they themselves may no longer find reward in it once they live long enough. So we have to be careful about who decides, how long, what our future should look like as human beings. And this maybe is a suggestion for a topic for another time. It's not my field, but certainly at Harvard we have many people who could speak about this. And that is the incredible power now that we have to manipulate ourselves as never before with the technology that you have all probably heard, CRISPR, which is not referring to fried chicken or anything like that. It's an acronym for a really painful, long description of a technology that can allow you to modify the human genome in the germline state, so even before someone's born. And that, I think, more than anything, is, I would say, the biggest opportunity, in the sense of opportunity to change fundamentally human lifespan, but also the biggest threat to the human race that we have today. So very interesting stuff to think more about. Next slide. So maybe I'll save this for the end, actually, because these are some of the things that people can do that are human solutions and common good solutions for the problems of older age and of younger age. I guess I'll finish it up now because I have time. But the Experience Corps is a nationwide program in high-need elementary schools where you get retired teachers to help students in their first years of school. And with this, they've seen, so it's kind of like grandma or grandpa comes and reads to you, essentially, and teaches you how to read, works with you, gives you tutoring. They've had a 30 to 50% decline in behavior problems in the young kids, a 60% improvement in literacy, and older adults are doing fantastic. They're happier in every possible way. So here again is a free lifestyle modification, you could say, that is incredibly effective at slowing aging and actually improving the lives of people throughout the lifespan. Next, veterans about their life, and they write a one-page life story that actually becomes part of the medical record. And I can tell you that this has completely transformed both young people and old people. Where older people are sharing their life experience, their wisdom, and they feel so good about being able, to make an impression on a young person and have someone who can tell their story and carry on their legacy. So to me, these are what's really needed in the area of improving quality of life of older patients, older people, I shouldn't say patients, and not some pharmaceutical that will keep us going forever. Next. Okay, so I think it's time for for your questions. I saw some good ones popping up, and I'll let Tanya take us through those.
Yeah, first, thank you very, very much for that presentation. This was not a topic that was familiar to me at all, and I got a sense of it going through your slides beforehand, but I've certainly learned a lot and still kind of processing and not sure if I can articulate a question. But I do see a couple of questions, so I will go through the ones that have been submitted through our question and answer box and our chat box. So we have one question here, which may have been addressed, but I'll let you comment. If we are over 50 and in good health, should we run to our doctor and ask for metformin?
That's a great question. So there is a study called the TAME study, treating aging with metformin or something like that. The FDA actually took a long time, but the FDA did approve the trial. And what's so fascinating is that there's no disease. I mean, in a sense, they're considering aging to be a disease, right? Because if you have no disease and you're taking metformin, what's the indication? So the indication is aging. Now, that's not going to be given to people who are 50. I think you have to be older than that, probably 65 or something. I'm not sure. It might be younger, but the bottom line is they're taking healthy people who are aging, and they are giving them giving them metformin kind of as a preventive, or almost like a vitamin, or however you want to think about it. And they're following all the different aging diseases and figuring out, is it slowing them down? And does that outweigh the risks of being on a drug like metformin for however long they're doing it? So I don't know if they're going to give it to them for 3 years or 5 years, but the idea is that they are going to have placebo controls, so they will know by the end whether it's really helpful or not. And then they're following a lot of biomarkers, and they're following, obviously, the development of any age-related diseases. They're doing cognitive function, they're doing physical function. So if the trial ever gets off the ground, it's been very slow to get off the ground because it's going to be incredibly expensive. Then we'll have the answer for you, probably in 5 years or so.
That's great, thank you. I have another question here. Are there medical research regulations applicable to these types of enhancements, the transhumanist enhancements? And what's the role of medicine to provide guardrails, if any?
That's a great question, thank you. Well, you could ask, what's the role of society to provide guardrails? Medicine has not always been the best at providing its own guardrails. That's why we have institutional review boards that have to approve medical research, and that they always include people who are non-medical, right? That you have people who have a say from outside the medical community. Yes, I mean, all of society, and I think that's why this topic is on your radar in the series, is it has to be everyone. It can't just be that the smart people, quote unquote, who know what transhumanism is get to change the world, because nobody else knows what CRISPR is, and nobody else is thinking about whether this is good for us as a group or as a species or not. There's a moratorium, an international moratorium that's been put on CRISPR for editing genes in embryos. human embryos. As you know, it's already happened. It happened in China. The twins, I think there were twins born with a gene edited so they'd be less likely to get HIV. It created international outrage. Unfortunately, though, I mean, it's happening. It's probably happening in people's basement, for all I know. So it's a time when we really need to create awareness about these things, because before we know it, the cat's out of the bag, and they're already offering commercially, for you to edit your child's emotions, strength, hair color, whatever it might be. So it's, on the other hand, could you cure diseases with this? Absolutely. Could you prevent disease with it? Absolutely. It's a really tricky dilemma, because you can make very strong arguments for the technology. It's just, how do you keep it from becoming something that essentially could fundamentally alter what it means to be human? And then who would be in charge?
Yeah, no, these are big questions. Gosh, we're getting quite a few here. Good. Okay. I have a kind of a half comment and a question. As far as I know, the FDA does not regulate most of the nutraceuticals, so they skip those regulations.
That's right.
Categorized as drugs. Okay, that's true.
Yeah, it's true. And we may find that you could say that metformin is a nutraceutical in the sense that it comes from a lilac plant, right? Aspirin comes from tree bark. So, some nutraceuticals may have active agents that are quote unquote drugs. And we need to study. We should be studying anything that looks interesting to see what are its properties. I think, for me, the challenge is that there's a lot of things being sold. It's a huge industry. It's as big as the prescription drug industry, if not bigger. People spending huge amounts of money on these things that are supposedly going to, extend their life, cure their arthritis, whatever. I mean, a lot of it is quackery, meaning like it's just making money on a placebo, or some of it may be really interesting and helpful. So there's more and more people studying these approaches, and hopefully we'll have, some better information for you besides what you read in GNC about some powder that's supposed to, cure everything that's wrong with you.
Right. And I think we're having some questions around quality of life as well as quantity, if we can extend the quantity. So how will Social Security and Medicare, for example, be funded to support extended life expectancies, since current budgets assume, approximately 80 years as the life expectancy?
Yeah, very astute question. It's a great question. We're already in big trouble, as you may know, with the aging of the population and the decrease in birth rates. A society becomes unsustainable. That's what's happening in Japan. And unfortunately, I think people don't care enough about future generations to really do much about it. But it is a big problem. We're very tuned in as a nation and as a world right now to the environment, right? To sustainability of the environment. But what about the sustainability of human beings in terms of, there's enough work for everyone, there's enough, and this gets into the thing too of social policy. Is it good that they say in 10 years, there'll be no more human driven cars because it's just safer? What about all the drivers in the world? What are they supposed to do? Is this a good thing that we won't have Uber anymore? We'll just have, some robot that comes to pick you up because it's safer. There's so many good questions like that about what is a sustainable future, not just is the air clean, but are human beings, do they have a purpose? Can they flourish in this life? Or do they just become kind of the bystander of technology gone wild? It's really up to us. It's up to you who are younger than me probably, but these are the deep questions that people have to get interested in, because the forces that are driving the decisions tend not to be very humanistic, in the sense of they're not doing things because it's the best for human beings. Generally, things are driven by profit. and what's profitable is not always what's best for human beings.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a number of questions around, yeah, how to have an impact in society when there are these transhumanist ideals, you know, how to keep up the technology, that the ethics match the technology.
Yeah, well, I think it has to come from the grassroots. It's the same with, you know, GMO foods. In Europe, people just don't stand for it. They just don't want, you know, jellyfish genes in their potatoes or whatever the latest thing they're doing in the agriculture business. And so they don't sell it. And I think it's a tough one, because how can you educate the populace about something that seems so esoteric and out there? But that's what needs to happen, I think without a grassroots rejection, because who is it that drives the economy? It's people and their individual choices. And if they decide they don't want this and they don't want that, then there isn't the drive to do it. So that's one thing. And then I do think, you know, among the elites of the world, there have to be people who can go toe to toe with those who are just pushing this forward. And they are out there. I met some of them at this conference, and it was really edifying to see how these ethicists and you know, just people who are really concerned about different justice issues were fighting very effectively against some of these trends, making very strong arguments for human rights and for equality and you know, just social justice. So the arguments are not hard to make. It's just we need people making them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's another great question here, and we have a number. Sorry if I...
No, that's okay. I'm happy to stay on. I think we're running over, but I'm happy to stay on for as long as you need.
So another question here, is it possible to increase health span without increasing lifespan?
Well, you probably would end up increasing a lifespan a tiny bit, perhaps. But yes, I mean, that's the whole movement of the geroscience community. We're not interested in increasing lifespan. We just want to increase health span. So yes, it is possible to increase health span, which really would be the percentage of your life that you're healthy out of your normal lifespan. Would we push it a little bit? Maybe, but not significantly. At least with things like metformin. But remember, I mean, the most important improvements in life expectancy, you know, just think about Africa again. You know, if in Sierra Leone, the average or the life expectancy is 50 still today, because so many people are dying in infancy or of HIV or whatever it might be, poverty. I mean, isn't that our moral obligation to before we try to increase our own health span, shouldn't we be, you know, looking to people who need help just getting to be able to live into their 60s? It's, you know, it's just very interesting when you think about that. Where should the global effort be put? Is it even seemly for people in a wealthy country to do things to increase their, you know, their life expectancy significantly, so that they're pushing the limits of human lifespan? I don't know. You know, these are good questions. But to answer your question, yes, you can improve health span without increasing lifespan to any significant degree.
Okay. And what is the most convincing argument you've heard in favor of transhumanism?
Well, I think you know, transhumanists they're very optimistic people. You know, so it's attractive. Oh, we can solve every problem, and I think probably their strongest arguments are that they can cure things that people care about. So, you know, they could lead with, if we get this technology, then we can, you know, solve all the world's problems. And they give you a long list of how they can do that. If people are living longer, they have more work, there's more workforce in them. And so then that could actually help an economy. there's less money spent on medical bills. There's more, time and energy, and human, people can be happy for longer, and, depending on how you define happiness. So a lot of good could come from the different technology. And they don't lead with the kind of selfish, I just want to live forever because I'm so great. There's a lot of good that could be done with the mechanisms that would increase human lifespan. And that's why it can be so under the radar and not raise red flags, because who doesn't want to cure this or that disease? Who doesn't want to, live in a healthy way for longer, for more years?
Yeah. Yeah, and to that point, I see a question and a comment from someone who has a friend who had experimental stem cell therapy done using his own stem cells, and it has stopped his pain and increased his energy. And then the point also that Elon Musk's company Neuralink creates chips to place in brains to potentially allow quadriplegics to walk again. Or and are these things, well, I guess I would ask first, is that transhumanist? Is that somewhere on the border? And are these things that we should pursue?
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, who wouldn't want to help a quadriplegic walk by putting a little chip in their brain? From my point of view, that would be therapy. Right now we're building exoskeletons so people can walk. What if you could, instead of having them wear something on the outside of the body, put something on the inside that would stimulate their ability to walk? Again, I would wonder, what are the means? Because the end doesn't justify the means, so there might be some techniques that they would be using to try to bring about that cure, or that, I wouldn't call that enhancement. I would call that, medicine. You're trying to bring a sick body back to health. So I would want to know what the means they were using to do that are, and if they're okay, if they're moral means. And I wouldn't consider that to be a human enhancement. I would consider it to be a therapeutic intervention. We have pacemakers in just about every other older person, right? We've been putting boxes in people for years. It just depends on, what goes into that. Are the means being used ethically okay? The result should be okay. But it also brings that an interesting topic, which is cyborgs, right? So how much can you put into the human person in terms of technology and equipment and still have them be human? There's lots of cool sci-fi around that. And that reminds me too of, it's sad, but some people are having all kinds of things placed in themselves just to become a cyborg. It's almost like a weird religion where they just think it's super cool to have chips and devices in their body, and they don't even do anything for them. It's just, again, it's almost like a replacement for religion for some people, or some kind of therapy that they think they're giving themselves. I'm not sure, but it's a very interesting area, the area of cyborg, and which just means machine inside a human body, or part of a human body. But the example you gave about helping a quadriplegic walk, I wouldn't consider that human enhancement. I would consider that therapy. If they're using embryonic stem cells to do whatever it is they're doing, then I personally would say that the means that they're using are not ethical. And so for me, that would obviate that would just kind of cancel the project. But for most people, that wouldn't cancel it. So I hope that's helpful. But you brought up a great example of, is this enhancement? Is this transhumanist? I would say no, it's not transhumanist. It's medical. You're trying to restore the ability to walk to someone who's lost it.
And maybe that's kind of the trick of it, is that sometimes it can be hard to know is this something I should object to, or is this something that, yeah, is a medical therapy that could be legitimate? No, thank you. That's very helpful. I think we have time for a couple more questions, so I'll try to do my best to get through them. What are the best therapies to maintain a sustainable cognitive function in aging, and does electromodulation work for this purpose?
So can you say it again? Electromodulation?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know if electromodulation works. I'm sorry, I can't answer that part, but I can answer the first part, which is yes, there's a lot you can do to improve your cognition. In fact, the only things we know that really help to prevent Alzheimer's disease are things that also prevent a heart attack. So most people know what those things are, right? Exercise, diet, and don't have diabetes, don't smoke. It all sounds very boring and common, right? But those are absolutely effective ways of decreasing, of improving the way you age, of decreasing your risk of a whole host of age-related diseases. And so that's one. So it's basically keeping the blood vessels in your brain healthy. Blood vessels bring food to the brain. They take the junk out of the brain. They, they are intimately related in keeping neurons healthy. So anything that's going to keep your vascular health in good shape is going to keep your brain in good shape. Another thing is to exercise the brain. And you may have heard this. People who speak 4 languages have a significantly lower risk of ever developing Alzheimer's disease than people who only speak 1. And actually, with each language you know, on top of your mother tongue, your risk goes down, I think, up to like 5 languages or something like that. And then you max out. But people in Luxembourg, I think they speak an average of 4 languages there, something crazy. They have significantly lower risk of Alzheimer's disease there. So cognitive engagement. So how do you exercise your brain? Stay engaged. And when you're older, have a hobby. Get a hobby now, before it's too late, and have interests and stay involved in things. We know that things like Tai Chi and yoga, and other types of exercise, you kind of have to concentrate a little to do it, are extremely healthy for the brain, and they can improve people who already have cognitive impairment. So diet, exercise, healthy lifestyle, getting enough sleep, trying not to be stressed out all the time. Stress is bad for the brain if it's too much for too long. Those are some pretty basic approaches that, as far as we know, work better than any type of pill or other intervention.
Thank you. And I know we had a few other questions, but in the interest of time, I kind of want to segue to our next topic, or our next point here. And some of the remaining questions were around, how are we approaching this issue of transhumanism in the public square? Questions about euthanasia and whether that's appropriate for a government to be, advertising that as a way of solving health issues, or as you pick when you want to end your life, kind of a thing, or running out of resources, kind of a thing. So just practically, what are the things that we can do in the public square that can address some of these issues of transhumanism and where it pops up in our civic political discourse?
Okay, well, let's see if I can do justice to all that. Let's see, well, these are just the thoughts that popped into my head in terms of practical consequences of the talk. I think one is it's so important that we have a dialogue in our society about what does human enhancement really mean, and what brings human happiness. So ultimately, people want to be happy. That's why they want to live longer. They think that they want to be happy for longer. And there's a growing literature, some great work's being done actually at Harvard on this, but what makes people happy, what makes human flourishing, And we know for a fact it does not have to do with being smarter. It doesn't have to do with being faster, stronger, richer. It doesn't. Ultimately, it boils down to bonds between people, relationships, and having an ideal, fighting for that ideal, having values, living according to those values. Those types of intangible things are what really promotes human flourishing. They're free, and it doesn't really matter how long you live on the earth. You can acquire them by living a certain kind of a life that people used to call a virtuous life, right? Ancient Greeks. Now we use other terms to say the same thing. So I think a practical conclusion is, to question when you hear about people who are promoting this type of future or solution, to question on this level. How is that going to make us love each other more? How's that going to make anybody happier? And in our own lives, just realizing that, those things are not what makes people happy, even though you would never know it by watching mainstream media or commercials or things like that. And then what's important for human happiness is also to be free. And one of the most powerful, I think, criticisms of transhumanism is that it ends up limiting human freedom. If you're manipulated into existence, that limits you, right? If your parents decided what eye color you have, how fast you're going to be, whether you're going to be a runner or a ballerina, that has violated your dignity and your freedom in a very strong way. So it's a human rights issue to some degree. Also the equity issue, right? Is this where we're going to pour all our money? We have all these billionaires, they're pouring their money into living a few years longer. Is that really what we want? It's not attractive. And so I think pointing these things out, pointing to the life expectancy in Sierra Leone and saying, how can you be focusing on this when we have this? What do you say to that? Usually the transhumanists, they don't care. So, or they'll say, oh, well, if we live longer, that'll give us more time to figure out how to fix Sierra Leone. But let's see. The other thing is a practical consequence is that true happiness and growth are only possible with limitations and overcoming limitations. They're only possible in the presence of suffering, because that's the only thing that helps us to grow. So true human growth and enhancement has to do with the human spirit growing, and not with being completely healthy or superior in some way. So practical consequence is recognizing that a lot of this type of thinking essentially equates good with pleasure and evil with pain. And it's a very materialistic view that can never really result in human happiness, because it denies the importance of suffering and is just trying to eradicate it. And then this idea that what makes life precious is that it has an end. It's only, we have to live with our end in mind, with that finiteness. The ancient Greeks, had beautiful things to say about this, that that's what determines who we are. And if we don't have that, who are we? How would we even function? And then, I give the transhumanists credit because they really, they're optimists. They're techno-optimists. They're optimistic about the human race. They're optimistic about our ability to solve problems. And I think that's all extremely good. But I think where they miss the point is that the transcendence we need is not over these material limitations. It's to grow spiritually so that we can embrace the reality of our life, and for those of us who believe in an afterlife, to be ready for that. And no materialist utopia can ever satisfy the human heart. And so it's it's a pipe dream to think that technology is going to be able to be our savior. So anyway, I don't know. I don't know if that's practical enough for you, but I would just encourage you. I'm going to make this talk. There's a lot more in my talk that I was able to say tonight. So I had to kind of skip around, and there's a little more depth to it that maybe you would find helpful. But I count on you guys to come up with some action items in your own life. And I think one could be simply, how am I really involved with the older people in my life? Do I recognize that they're a treasure that I can learn from? And that way, older age doesn't become a scary thing that has to be avoided. It becomes part of the circle of life that we can embrace. And often our road to happiness in life and fulfillment is caring for other people at the other end of life, whether it's, it could be a child, or it could be a parent, grandparent. And this is really the sustainable future for the human race, is to embrace the reality that life is a gift and not a right, and that there's kind of a time and a season for everything. And all of those times and seasons have meaning. So anyway, it's hard to tackle a topic this big in a small talk, but hopefully we've been able to pique your interest in it. And I think the articles that they provided for you are interesting, easy to read, and give you a little more background. And then I think that the talk, I'm happy to send it around and have people be able to reference that as well.
This is all wonderful and very thought-provoking. And yeah, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of my own experiences that just correspond with everything that you've been saying about the value of suffering and the value of those in our lives who are elderly, taking care of those who need us. All of that is very edifying. And I think, yeah, you've gotten us started, and the hope with these webinar series is not to end the conversation when the webinar itself is over, but to keep engaged and keep talking about it, keep thinking about ways that we can tackle these issues in our very practical circumstances that we come across. So you've given us a great start, and Global Responsibility is definitely going to follow up with all of today's participants with some tools for staying more engaged on this topic. So we've got a few things on our website, of course, but we also have a partnership with an online platform called commongood.org. And one of our GR staff just posted the link to that in the chat box. We're also going to include that in the follow-up email after this webinar. And we've created a Slack channel. I'm old enough that I don't really know what Slack is. It's the thing, and people know what it is. But it's a tool for conversation and for action planning and all of that. So we have a Slack channel on the Common Good website. And again, everyone who participated tonight will get a link to that in the follow-up email. We're also going to be distributing and sharing this webinar, the recording of it. So hopefully that'll be a place to continue the conversation, continue asking questions. Our website, Global Responsibility website, has a blog that we're going to have a post on this topic in the next couple of days. So we invite people to check that out and to post a comment, to consider being a guest blog submitter if you're so interested. And you're going to be invited to participate in any of our social media channels that we are putting together. So there will be opportunities to keep talking about it for sure. So if we go to the next slide, just a quick plug for our upcoming webinars. As I mentioned, this is the first in a series, the Common Good in the Public Square series. And we want to follow a similar format with each one, with really learning about an issue and then having our minds leaked into action as the kind of natural extension of really understanding what is the common good and what is true human dignity, and we should be working for it any place that we see an opportunity. So we have additional webinars coming up. Our next one on December 7 at the same time will be Social Implications of Fratelli Tutti, which is the new encyclical by Pope Francis. And our speaker is His Excellency Archbishop Christophe Pierre, who is the Apostolic Nuncio to the United States. Dr. Driver, you were tough shoes to follow in. So we had to go to the Nuncio to top your, well, maybe not even, but yeah, we had to reach for the stars. So everyone who participated tonight will be invited to join that and extend the invitation to your friends. And then we have another webinar in January on the free market economy. So, and also check our events page on the Global Responsibility website for registration information and for other event information. Just before we close, this, as I have said, is the first webinar of our series. So we have a quick survey that we'd be really grateful for people to take a minute to answer. And it's been posted in the chat box, and I believe we can also include that in the follow-up email, just to let us know how the format worked and if there are other topics that might be of interest, because we really want this to be participatory as much as possible. And consider donating if you feel so inspired, if that's a way that you can support this effort. And then, as I said, check out our website for more information about who Global Responsibility is and how to get involved and all of that good stuff. So I know we're just about at time. So Dr. Driver, did you have any closing comments that you want to offer before we end for the evening?
Well, this is a silly one, but I just would encourage people to watch a superhero movie and ask themselves why the superheroes are superheroes. I think that is a beautiful way of summarizing. It's, do we love Captain America because he's so strong, because he's so fast, because he's so whatever, and he doesn't age well, he doesn't age at all. No, we love him because of his virtues. And I think that's, he's always fighting for the little guy. He finds something to bow to in every human person. And that's the ultimate success, I think, of a human being, is to be able to recognize what there is to reverence in another person. That message is all throughout great literature. It's all throughout scriptures of all kinds across the world. But I think that human superiority, this idea of who is the superior human, I think it's the one who makes it to the top of the life stages and then helps everybody else by sharing their wisdom.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, right on the nail. Thank you very much again, and thank you to everyone who is here tonight. Getting some good comments and very much appreciate your time, Dr. Driver. And yeah, stay involved with us to everyone who participated, and hopefully we'll see you in a future webinar. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.